Hi guys, Lotus Streams here, coming at you with the second part of the Space Marine Codex review. It's a relatively short one, because I uh, underestimated how little they changed. But I'll talk a little bit about the Primaris models and try to make it a little bit easier to get the overview over all of this new stuff. But I think there will still be some new Primaris releases after this, because there's still some huge gaps to be filled. But it's always good to have some sort of overview from an official codex, because that's what people are going to use most likely, and not the index book. So, getting right to the changes. Um, First of all, if the codex has a specific datasheet for a unit, it invalidates the index 1. So, unless the unit, that's one exception, has no entry in the codex, which means you can still use the index, you cannot use the war gear and the like from the index, which leaves some holes here and there. For example, Khan has no bike, which is like, what? Why the hell doesn't he have that? He lost Moondraken in this book, and even with the FAQ stating you can use old stuff, etc., etc., if an entire entry is replaced, I don't think you can. That's something they need to FAQ if they want to go with it. But right now there isn't a model for him, so there is a reason why they wouldn't do that. And I'm gonna play it like this until it gets FAQ'd. So the Dreadnought lost his twin heavy bolter, flamer, and the autocannon, so no rifle dreads and everything, because he cannot replace his close combat weapon with a autocannon either, just with a missile launcher. Sergeant can't take Gombi Graph for some reason. Not really thinking there's a big change. Honor Guard can only take power axes, which is a little bit weird, I find. I don't think there was any issue with those not taking anything else, but I think again, do they have the models? Yes or no? And same goes for the chapter champion and his champion's blade and power sword and nothing else. No power fist, anything like that. Tigurius, for some reason, has a ability that allows him to get -1 to hit, not for himself, but also he gives this to a unit within 6 inches if he wants to. So he can still put it on himself, but now he got way better in terms of his abilities, which I find a little bit odd because he's not a bad unit per se. But it's interesting. The Inceptor's crushing charge is now per model. That's actually a big deal because these abilities don't do as much, and if it's per model, at least there's some sort of benefit for getting into close combat after all, even with these guys. We'll talk about the Inceptors later. Fire Cannon has 1 AP. It used to have 0, so it's swing 5, AP 1 now. Guess that's good in combination with the stratagem, especially because that means it's a little bit more effective against other stuff, even with -1 to the wound roll. And then you have a reason to bring a Thunderfire Cannon for both of these. Don't think it makes them much better or much worse, but you know, fair enough. And then there's a bunch of oddballs in here. For example, the Hunter got -30 points for whatever reason. I don't think you would take the Hunter over Stalkers anytime anyway, but you know, obviously a point drop is the first step into the right direction, but I think still the Stalker is the more reliable anti-air. Minus Karga is -50 points. That's a little bit odd, let's say. Still not my favorite. -40 points on the Ironclad Dreadnought as well, which is also very odd, but makes sense. Because he's a non-shooty version per se, and Ironclads don't make their points back very easily, and as such they should generally be cheaper than the ranged version. Same as Stern Guard and Vanguard. Vanguard also should be cheaper than Stern Guard because they have less time to make their points back. It's a classic ranged versus melee problem there is, and I think the Ironclad was in dire need of something like this because there's no good reason to run him like this. Cassius also got cheaper. The Emperor's Champion got cheaper, which is great news for anything like Black Templar armies because obviously he's a good guy. He can do a lot of stuff in close combat, and him being cheaper is obviously great for any assault army. per se. And in addition to this, Kronos also got cheaper. I don't think that makes much of a difference because Kronos is still weird, but at least he gives his 2+ ballistic skill for a vehicle of your choice, no matter the damage table, which was FAQ'd. So that's nice. Kronos is not that bad. 70 points for Captain in Terminator armor, which is nice. I like that. I like my Terminators anyway. And if you want to have that reroll everything dropping down from the sky, thanks to your newer chapter master in Terminator armor, you get to smear him all across the table for cheaper, which is obviously great. 17 points is actually a pretty big number. Talion got 14 points more expensive for some reason. I'm not really sure why that's the case. I don't think he's super good or anything. Probably because he's a cheap HQ, and that's just the reason why. I don't know. This is how I feel about him anyway. -2 and +2 points for the Hellblasters, so their points cost didn't change at all. Can ignore this. And -2 points for Librarians, which is almost nothing. 5 points, also almost nothing. -1 points for the Sternguard armor. That is a big deal, because Sternguard are already really good, as I explained, with their special ammo and such, and the doctrine. And you know, whatever chapter tactics you may have, even if your Salamanders Sternguard perform better than before, and they get a great stratagem to use. And 1 point cheaper means they're rocking 18 points now, which is really not that expensive if you consider everything, because the normal, let's say, veteran Space Marine is expected to be at 20, around that. -6 for bikes is also pretty nice. -10 for tech bikes is obviously even more of a deal, because you get to put these into your little fast attack slots, and if you want to have a bunch of stratagems, attack bikes are obviously a cheap choice. So -10 makes actually a big difference, because you might take 3, and that's 30 points just off that you can invest somewhere else. -15 points for Inceptors makes sense. I'll talk about that later. And -10 points for Landspeeders and Landspeeder Storms, which I think tips them over to the fact where I would try to play them and see what happens. Because Landspeeders had no real how do you say it? They were never bad, but the formations they had were not so good, and they blew up too easily, which they still do, but at least they can be buffed in some way, and they have some good firepower. Heavy bolters got buffed in this new edition all around, and obviously Landspeeder Storm and the Landspeeders have both the heavy bolter profile if they choose to do so. And -10 for the drop pods. Not sure how much worth that is, because the drop pod is very expensive. I'd rather run something else than a drop pod, to be honest. Don't think there has to be a very specific cause for this to actually matter. Other than this, should be still too expensive. And that's all the changes. I couldn't find anything more. Maybe there's something more and I missed it. Feel free to tell me if I did. But there's a bunch of stuff missing, essentially. You can't take apothecaries on bikes and whatnot. There's a bunch of war gear missing. And essentially, if you have a look at the Games Workshop homepage and see what you can buy for Space Marines, anything that you can't buy, you probably can't take with the new Codex over the Index, because the Index still listed all kinds of weird, outdated stuff, or stuff that shouldn't be possible just because you can't buy the model. That's essentially it. Alright, let's go to the Primaris stuff. I have a list here. It looks a little bit simplified, but a lot of this was already released, and there's very few stuff that was actually changed or released. Because if you look at it, the first captain, he has 6 wounds, 6 attacks, and a different rifle, but other than this, he's exactly the same as a normal captain. Except he's a Primaris captain, so you can't put him in any transports or something like that. So essentially, it's a little bit more tanky, a little more choppy version, and he can take a auto/stalker bolt rifle, which is essentially either he has to stand still and get more AP, or he has a assault weapon with 2 shots, 24 range, which is normal. I don't know. Bolt rifles per se are not that bad, I think. They're okay. But the models are very expensive usually. So I'm not sure about it. So essentially, if you look down the list here, Librarian also get +1 wound, +1 attack. Chaplain gets it. Apothecary just 5 wounds, but you know. Everything essentially gets 1 wound more, 1 attack more, except the Apothecary. And then the Chaplain and the Apothecary also get a special pistol that has range 16, strength 5, AP -1, which is nice, I guess. But yeah, I don't exactly know what you're looking for here. I mean, when was there ever a time where you said to yourself, well, I really need a tankier apothecary here? My character really doesn't cut it. And that's a question you should ask yourself, because if not, then I don't know. It's really hard to get these guys across the field because obviously they are Primaris models. So you can't put them in any transports because they also can't transport Primaris except the new ones. Which sounds like a big money grab to me, to be honest, because that obviously means they have to sell transports for Primaris, and they can sell those separately because they know every single Space Marine has a bunch of drop pods, has a bunch of rhinos already, and now they have to jump onto the next train if they want to stay relevant, which a lot of people will obviously do. That's how I feel about it, at least. So there's really not that much new to everything. And if you look across the other units, you always see this wound 2 thing. That's essentially what they did. If you look at the intercessors, for example, which is the pendant to the tactical squad, they also get 2 wounds and 2 attacks. So a little bit like veterans because of the attacks, but more wounds, which veterans do not get. And they are a tactical squad stripped down to the bare minimum and then with improved bolt guns. So more like a stern guard than anything else, pretty much. Essentially, they can get a bolt rifle, an auto bolt rifle, a stalker bolt rifle, and an auxiliary grenade launcher, which you can get 2 of for some reason, but don't do it because essentially the grenade launcher only increases the range on your frag grenades. It's not really all that funny. You can take 10 now, which is a change to the old datasheet. And essentially, you can't take any plasma guns, flamer, whatever you want. You always have to stick to your bolt gun stuff, which is always something like strength 4, AP -1, or 2 shots from an assault weapon with 24 range, or something like a heavy weapon with 30 and just 1 shot but -2 AP. So they are a little bit weird because you have to make use of the AP and you have to want to take tankier models than usual, essentially. That's why I'm not such a fan of all the Primaris stuff, but that's my playstyle. I like my stuff with a big bang, and these guys do not have a big bang necessarily because you're paying very, very few points for the actual DACA and most points for the units themselves, which are essentially Space Marines a ton better because of the wounds and the equipment, but in the end, still Marines that die just as fast. If you just take 2 normal Marines, you're most likely better off because of the damage values. Autocannons will kill these guys pretty easily. And that's not good for business, obviously. The Reavers are exact same. They're essentially a mixture of assault marines and scouts because they have the 3+ from the actual assault marines. They also can get deep strike and outflank, as I already said, with the parachutes, and they are a little bit like scouts because they can use a combat knife if they want to. It just gives them +1 damage. The heavy bolt pistol is just -1 AP, and otherwise a normal pistol, and the bolt carabines are essentially how do you say it? Close range rapid fire bolt guns. Except they're not rapid fire, but 2 shots, something like that. Also gain you -1 to the leadership of units within 3 inches of them or something like that. But I don't think that's going to be very impactful in that sense. I wouldn't necessarily take them for that trait. Yeah, in the end, you're dropping very, very beefy scouts / assault marines behind enemy lines if you want to, that are somehow still pretty expensive. Not really sure how good that is. Most of their stuff is designed to not work with your deep striking capabilities. Even the outflank has to be 9 inches away. So shock grenades and all the like doesn't work unless you let them stay there for one entire turn, and then in the following assault they can use all the special stuff that they like and maybe make an impact with their abilities. But until then, they are essentially prone to just get shut down. Aggressors are a more interesting concept because they are movement 5, but don't get fooled, that's not their problem. They are toughness 5, so they are actually 2 wounds toughness 5 is actually a pretty good chunk of power in a sense. So they're even more tanky than their other guys. And they're also rocking the 2 attacks as everybody else. Essentially, they have an Auto Bolt Storm Gauntlet, which is Assault 6, Strength 4, AP Dash, so just a bunch of shots. And they can use the very same as a Power Fist, so -1 to hit, AP -3, double strength, and so on. So sounds very, very Terminator-like. And then they also have a grenade launcher, which gives you another D6 shot, strength 4, AP dash, and so on. So essentially, you're putting out a lot of shots, and you have some decent close combat capabilities, and they are very similar to Terminators in this sense, except these guys cannot deep strike. They don't have any sort of mobility attached to them other than their normal moving and advancing, which is actually not as bad as it sounds, because the aggressors can advance and still fire the assault weapons without having any problems with that, and essentially the entire kit is assault weapons. So there you go. Pretty easy to remember. These guys essentially always move 5 inches plus d6, and then they get to shoot their stuff and so on. And they are not even close to being Terminators in the sense of what Terminators can do, because they can't get any they can't get any storm shields, they can't get deep strike, they can't get the assault cannons or any kind of rocket launcher and all that stuff. The only option they have is they can take Firestorm Gauntlets, which gets you assault 2d6, strength 4 AP dash, so double flamer, still power fist in close combat, and essentially, yeah. I mean, you're dropping the reliable 6 attacks for 2d6. So it might pay off, it might not. That depends how good you are with rolling and what kind of modifiers you have. For example, do you have something to reroll your hits? In that case, obviously the flamer version loses its value most of the time, just because you're hitting more on average. In addition to this, you're also dropping the grenade launcher, as far as I read it, and that obviously deals less damage overall. And then they got a very funny mechanic. If you choose to not advance and not use your additional mobility with movement, you actually get to shoot twice. That's a very interesting concept for me, because that means the aggressors, how the name says, can be used aggressively and walk up the field or something, or maybe carried inside of a transport that will for sure be existent. There will be a Land Raider Primaris or something like that, I assure you that. But they can also be chosen to defend something that has a very, I don't know how you say it. It has enough damage output but not enough defense to defend itself, such as Centurions. If something comes close to Centurions, it has to die, and it has to die quickly. And most of the stuff, the Centurions can kill themselves with their bolt gun fire. There's only one problem: huge hordes of very elite monstrous creatures. And as a buffer between those, you can use Terminators, but those are very expensive and they are probably not geared very well towards hordes. They just get overrun immediately. And in this case, you might be able to use these guys better because they still have a good power fist profile in close combat, so they can punch Hive Tyrants and whatnot in the face and do pretty well. They also deal a whole lot of damage to hordes, especially if they come close, and the Centurions basically force your opponent to come closer or being able to win the shoot off with the Centurion straight up. So in that sense, you could use the aggressors as a little defense turret more than a aggressive moving forward army. And even then, the additional movement and the ability to advance and still shoot makes it a little bit cooler because you can also try to fall back. So the aggressors are even less aggressive in that sense that they actually can use their extra movement and try to stay in shooting range, but out of any distance to get assaulted by orcs or whatnot. So you have a kiting mechanic inbuilt as well, which a lot of people will obviously not consider. But as soon as you get your first Inceptor squad wiped by orcs, you might consider your aggressors a little bit more and hopefully not run right in there as well, because they can be used like this as well. Talking about Inceptors. Inceptors are essentially Assault Marines because they're moving 10, but they are toughness 5 to wounds to attacks as well. So not really the same profile. Assault Marines are pretty Glasshammer-like. If they don't make the charge, they immediately die. Inceptors, not so much. They are harder to just knock down because of toughness 5, so they resist strength 8 weaponry, less cannons, and all that nasty stuff a little bit better, but still not too good, obviously. And they have assault bolters, which is exactly what it says. It's a heavy bolter with half range, so range 18, 3 shots assault. Not necessarily bad. A little bit weird to have it on them though, because it's a lot of firepower. But maybe you can shoot a secondary target with that and still make your charge, because these guys obviously want to get into close combat at some point. But they are not assault marines per se. They don't have to be in close combat. These weapons are actually pretty capable of shooting up something really nicely. They have the same kiting ability that the aggressors also have, although their firepower is obviously far more limited than theirs. They also can switch their entire weaponry for a range 18 assault 3 plasma guns, so to say, which makes them incredibly expensive and then really problematic actually, because their costs just explode as soon as you do so. But obviously makes them a ton more killy. Only issue with plasma weapons on any Primaris Marines is if you overheat, and if you actually die due to the overheating, you're paying a lot of points and you're losing both of your wounds in one go. And that's a no-go, because these guys are too expensive to just throw them up the field, shoot something, and then die. They have to trade efficiently, otherwise they are not doing their job very well. And ignoring your own 2 wound pool and toughness 5 with choosing a weapon that might kill you is probably not a good idea. So you have to be pretty careful, or just use the normal profile, which is in itself decent enough. Doesn't have to overheat most of the time. So they are, as you can see, every of these units is a kind of a hybrid unit. They are not necessarily meant to replace whatever was in the slot before, because in the same slot there would be assault marines, there would be close range fire stuff, is essentially a tactical squad or a stern gun squad out of a drop pod, and aggressors a little bit like hurricane bolters maybe on centurions, and terminators profiles mixed. So as you can see, there's a lot of mix and match here. The last one, the Hellblasters, 2 wounds to attackers as always. They have standard assault or heavy plasma options, and the difference between those is pretty simple. You have -1 strength. If you take the assault version, it essentially makes it better for you to get into range. Standard version has more range than the normal plasma gun at 30 and is rapid fire. And then the heavy version is just one, but it is +1 strength, so strength 8 slash strength 9 when overheated, when overheating, with 2 damage on each of these profiles, no matter the profile you choose. So they are interesting, but they have to get close, and they can be focused on very easily. This is essentially you're taking a command squad with a bunch of heavy weapons on them, and then throw them out to die because they don't have any way of getting close enough. Unless you're taking the heavy ones, in which case you trade your mobility for a lot of immobility. So you have to be making sure that the Hellblasters actually get protected somehow. They're rather expensive to lose, and you don't have any choice of making them cheap or anything like that. Primaris Marines are very, very straightforward. You barely have any options in what to take over something else or what to mix. You can only mix units. You cannot mix models very well if you're playing Primaris Marines, right? The intercessors don't have any plasma options. So if you want to have plasma, you either have the Hellblasters or the Inceptors or nothing. That's your option. You have some way of getting more AP. That's not the issue, but if you're looking for high strength shooting, the intercessors can't do anything for you. So that's actually pretty simple. Right, that's a overview over the Primaris infantry. Obviously, that's not all, but should give you a very good idea on what we're dealing with here. Essentially, we're dealing with 2 wounds models with 2 attacks or 1 attack more across the entire Space Marine line. And at the same time, there is not a single squad here that is solely made for close combat. All of these fulfill double roles or some weird mixture of pre-existing models and so on. But again, if you're looking for tankiness or something like that, they might be worth it. Iron Hands Captain, for example, would like to have some more wounds in his wound pool, and he works like a normal captain as well. But then again, you're limiting yourself to very, very, very few transport mechanics right now. So they will probably get more Land Raiders and Rhinos and whatnot out there to make sure that Primaris Marines get to go across the field somehow, because they are too expensive to just check on the field and wait. Don't forget something. Don't think the toughness 5 is such a big deal as last edition, because everything that is tough, the strength 8 or higher, usually has a damage profile of higher than 1. So that means the toughness 5 that is resisting strength 8 and higher much better than toughness 4 actually makes the weapons more efficient against whatever you're bringing, because your wound pool is 2. So 5 Inceptors still get gunned down by an auto carry rather nicely, because they lose their wounds every time. They only get wounded on 3+, that's true, but as soon as you shoot them with a last cannon, on average, still one of these guys will die. So it makes dedicated anti-tank more efficient against your guys. So the idea here would be obviously to bring something that draws the heavy firepower away from your Primaris Marines, which by the way is not normal Marines. It's usually strong close combat characters, infantry squads, vehicles. For example, Imperial Knight, and that might help you out a lot. Otherwise, people will come in with plasma guns blazing, and there's a lot of ways to deal 2 wounds to models. It's not as hard as you think, and you're paying a lot of points for these additional characteristics that might not come into play at all. A intercessor marine back in the backfield that gets hit and killed by an autocannon does not make it back his points, because he doesn't use his 2 attacks and he doesn't use his 2 wounds very well. That's what I'm trying to say. So keep that in mind if you're talking about Primaris Marines and what their power level might be and so on. I'll not judge them right now and say, no, they are all bad or all good, but I see their purpose and I don't like it. That's the main idea I have. I know what they're designed to do, but I wouldn't necessarily say they are what I want in that slot. But they might change, they might have more options. I like aggressors as a concept. I might use them, proxy them in for Centurions models, for example. Then we see how we finish this with a re-commentary. Alright, now to the vehicles. The big fat Dreadnought that everybody is excited about, but to be honest, I'm always honest in my reviews, let's say that. I'm not hyping up anything like other people do if I don't think it's good. For example, the last Guilliman, where people are saying, oh, he's so overpowered, but he was never. He was never even included in one single tournament list that did well. Obviously, in Saki tournaments, okay, but not in the good ones. So the Redemptor Dreadnought has one big issue, because you can see over here, he has a lot of options with weaponry, but you don't see any special ability here other than explodes, which I didn't even mark down here because he's a vehicle and obviously he should explode, but nothing else. So this Dreadnought is only what you see here. It's a body, it's a vehicle stuffed full of weapons, and that's it. That is all he can do. Alright, so movement 8, he's a little bit faster, weapon skill and basic skill 3, which is meh. I'm expecting stuff like better than Venerable class if I'm thinking about Redemptor Dreadnought. But okay, apparently they're not better trained. Strength 7 is okay. Toughness 7 is not okay. Toughness 7 is actually really hurtful if you consider that Plasma will ruin your day if you overcharge it against you. And trust me, if there's command squads with science coming from the sky, this guy will die very quickly. No inborn saves. Toughness 7, that's ouch. Not good for business. His saving graces, he has 13 wounds, so it's actually not that easy to one-shot him. But on the other hand, if you're getting unlucky with a few last cannon hits, he will die and drop immediately. Especially if there's somebody gets in range with melter guns of any kind. Bright lances and whatnot, D-cannons, or ruin his day. No one saves is no good for any Dreadnought. He has 4 attacks, which is okay, but not necessarily super strong. Leadership 8 is okay, and save 3 is obviously okay in terms of what he should have, but no inborn save makes this a really low save. Because even a plasma gun will have -3 to this, so you're relying on your 6+ saves, and such a big model is very hard to hide and cover and actually find a terrain that is big enough to fit your big ass in and then even be 50% obscured. That is pretty hard to do. Alright, so what does he have always? He always has his Dread Close Combat Weapon, Strength ×2, AP 3, Damage D6, so we're talking about 14, Strength 14, which is good profile against other medium targets, not so good against Titans and the like, because you're lacking the last single strength to do it, but you know, that's enough. He has a Icarus rocket pod, which is really weird to me, because 24 range, it's okay, D3 shots, heavy, strength 7, AP 1, damage 1, and then ± on fly or not fly. I mean, it's cool that it has it, but I don't think it's going to make any difference. This thing cannot damage flyers reliably enough with strength 7, AP 1. It is worse against anything else that cannot fly, because it's obviously going to be hitting on a very bad number. If you move with this thing, even worse than probably on 5s. But even against flyers, it's not that good. I mean, it's not the Icarus Storm Array, not really. It's not even close to being the Onaga Dunecrawler profile. So let's say there's a little tiny bit of anti-flyer here. The next thing is he has a heavy flamer or onslaught Gatling cannon, which is range 24, heavy 6, strength 5, AP 1, D1, which is something I can appreciate. It's basically a shorter ranged heavy bolter because it has a heavy 6 or not D6. That's a big difference. So it's a pretty good one. The onslaught Gatling cannon seems to be a reliable tool of dishing out bolter shots. Then again, a Centurion can do the same. So we'll see. Next option is heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, which is range 30 and then 12 shots, and the rest the same. So now we're talking about 4 heavy bolters with just -6 to your range. So that's even a little bit more, and it's not something that has to be exchanged for the other one, right? So you can drop your heavy flamer, get some more range, get the heavy onslaught, and you can use them both together for 18 shots total. So 6 heavy bolters, which sounds pretty nice now. Then a macro plasma incinerator can be chosen instead of the heavy onslaught. Range 36, D6 shots, heavy, strength 8, 9, AP 4, damage 1, 2. So it's a plasma cannon, which is a little bit stronger because it has double the amount of shots and +1 strength and +1 AP. Would I choose this over the onslaught Gatling cannon? Yes, if I wanted to go for anti-tank, but if I want to go for anti-tank, I would most likely grab a las cannon just instead and be done with it. So I don't know, I think the heavy onslaught is better as slot efficiency if you want to run him. But then again, obviously, if you're expecting less infantry, the plasma version is better against everything else. But it's not a good idea to cause yourself a bunch of mortal wounds. And strength 9 is really nice because you get to damage heavy tanks much more easily on the 3+. But then again, it's a 2 damage profile. 2 damage is not D6 damage. It's on average even less, and you might run into a problem that you're rolling very low for your heavy D6. And then you also have to stand still, because otherwise your ballistic skill is even halved, which is not very good. And then last but not least, he has 2 frag storm grenade launchers, which is again the D6 strength 4 version, or 2 storm bolters. Obviously, this is a very weird choice because storm bolters just make the model cheaper, and they have to come closer than the frag storm grenade launchers, and that's it. There's not really much of an option here. It depends. Do you want to move forward on yes or no? If you want to move forward, why do you want to move forward with this model and not a ironclad, for example? But that's okay. Let's assume you wanted to move forward, then you would take those. So frag storm's probably the better option here. In 99%, but yeah. Alright, so sums up the Redemptor Dreadnought. He is supposed to be a beefier version of a Dreadnought with a lot of shooting, and essentially he drops the versatility of a Dreadnought to put everything on a Dreadnought that a Dreadnought could take, and then be versatile between the choices. But you're paying for a close combat weapon, you're paying for your Icarus Storm array, even if you don't even get to use it very well. That's something I don't like about him. He is versatile, and that is gonna be bumping his points up more than anything else. Then obviously he's also more tanky, but as I said, Dreadnoughts are dying rather quickly, and there's something like a 40-point squad of plasma guns will take them out in 1 turn, and this guy will maybe take 2 turns or 2 squads, and then he's going down as well. So it's a little bit dangerous to assume that this guy can do the job better than other Dreadnoughts. So I'm not really sure what to think of him, because I don't see his big purpose after all. I don't know. It's a little bit the fact. Do you want to run a Dreadnought really badly? Then I would say he's a solid option. And if you want to run a close combat Dreadnought, do not take him. I would rather take anything else. An Ironclad is obviously always the better choice. And if you're having Space Wolves, obviously their Storm Shields make the deal even better. That's the Redemptor Dreadnought for you. And then the Repulsor. Repulsor is something really, really weird, but I like it because it's a new concept, finally. So, imagine the Stormraven gunship. Now imagine the Stormraven gunship really, really slow. There we go. So the Repulsor is moving 10. That's not very much for something that can fly or hover. Let's say hover is the better word. I don't think fly is the right word. 3+3+ strength, 8 toughness, 8 16 wounds. That is a Land Raider in disguise. So this is actually the real flying toaster now. 4 attacks irrelevant most of the time, but you know. 4 attacks, leadership 9, 3+ save. Leadership 9 is interesting actually, but you know. Save 3 is okay. Again, no invuln saves here. I would write those down on the saves always. But he has something going for him at least. So first of all, -2 to all charge rolls that target the Repulsor. That's good, because as soon as something gets into close combat with you, you might have a little bit more trouble. -1 to hit instead of shooting when you're using your auto launchers. That's something that's actually really good. Invuln save are nice and everything, but reducing the ballistic skill is something that is shooting at you is actually a pretty nifty trait. Keep that in mind that this is an upgrade or an option, so we can use this as well. So first of all, it has a twin heavy bolter or last cannon. That's just tech choice. Heavy onslaught Gatling cannon. Remember the 12 shots version, or last talon, which is a 2-shot half range last cannon. So 24 range, strength 9, AP -3, and so on. Pretty close range, to be honest. Heavy onslaught is 30, twin 36, last cannon 48. An Iron Hail heavy stubber, which you can also take a second one, which is range 36, heavy 3, strength 4, AP 1, which is I don't know, it's still a heavy stubber, but okay. You can get a Onslaught Gatling cannon instead, and obviously if you want to have heavy dagger, I recommend the Onslaught Gatling cannon instead of the Iron Hail heavy stubber. Since you have power of the machine spirit, the heavy rule doesn't affect you at all. You're still mobile with your firepower if you want to. Then 2 frag storm grenade launchers or 2 storm bolters, nothing to talk about here. If you need to squeeze out a few points more, then take the storm bolters, otherwise don't. Auto launchers or 2 frag storm grenade launchers. Now this one, I am pretty sure that the auto launchers are the better version. I usually try to fit as much firepower as I can into these fat models, but the auto launchers actually, if you want to use this as a transport, it is the better version, I believe. The frag storm grenade launchers are pretty close range. They're not very reliable, and in the end, I don't think you necessarily have to take them. Auto launchers are nice as they are, I believe. And then an Icarus Iron Hair Heavy Stubber is actually the exact same as an Iron Hair Heavy Stubber with +/-1 to fly units, which you can exchange for an Icarus Rocket Pod, which is range 24, heavy D3, strength 7, AP 1, which is again nice and everything, but it's not really a very good anti-flyer weapon at all. But it has the same visual as the Icarus Heavy Stubber. And then you can take a Storm Bolter if you want to go extra cheap on the slot, or a Frag Storm Grenade Launcher again. So you can have up to 5 Frag Storm Grenade Launchers in there. It can be pretty silly. Apparently there's a lot of auto and frag grenading going on in the Primaris era of Marines, but you know, you could take it if you want to. And then finally, last but not least, it's a Repulsor, so it is a transport. Hallelujah, it's a Primaris infantry transport, but can't take anything else. So no jump pack or something like this. But you know, it's a first step into the direction that you can actually get Primaris Marines across the field. So that's good. Yeah, the Repulsor is weird. That's my first impression of it. It is very easily a good gunship, But is it as good as other gunships in terms of how cost efficient is it? And I believe there's a bunch of stuff in here that you can use if you come very close. So if you're not afraid of getting close into close range, the Repulsor has actually a ton of firepower. And then thanks to being a flying vehicle and a pretty tough toaster, you might be able to get away with flying him in and then trying to fall back and fire your weaponry thanks to being able to fly and also powerful machine spirit. However, with such a big model, it might be very hard for you to actually get away at times. For example, if you just get assaulted from space, deep striking, summoning, could ambush. So it might be a little bit risky, but I like it because it has transport capacity. So your precious Primaris guys can actually get in there. And then if there's something the Repulsor cannot deal with, you can actually drop out with your ace in the hole and ruin their day. For example, Tyranid monsters creatures are chewing on your Repulsor and you don't like it and you can't take them down with, because your Repulsor is anti-infantry most likely. You can drop out a few aggressors, for example. Because aggressors obviously are not jumping infantry and so on. They fit the entire Primaris thing. They have power fists. They got some good anti-infantry dagger as well. Okay, but in the end, it's just a bunch of shots and some power fists into said monsters creature's face, and they can also help the Repulsor to keep the distance from something that tries to charge and surround it. Or whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously intercessors and so on, not such a good idea, but you know, anything that can fit in there might be able to team up with what the Repulsor does. So that's nice. And in the worst case, you can grab a Chapter Master Primaris Captain in there. Obviously, will work as well. Alright, that's it. Wasn't as long as I expected, but then again, you can't do that if you read the Codex. Can't really predict this. But it was nice talking about the Primaris Marines in a little bit more old-fashioned way. Now, entirely gone from all the chapter tactics and whatnot we had in the second video, or the first video that I made. Alright. If you have questions, if you have comments, leave them below. And as always, thank you guys for watching and happy wargaming.